In the spring of 1925, the city of Paris was alive with the roaring energy of the decade. Jazz drifted out of crowded cafes, art was being reinvented on every corner, and the wounds of the First World War were slowly being paved over by modern progress. But progress is expensive, and the city of Paris was broke. Deep within the luxurious Hôtel de Crillon, one of the most exclusive addresses in Paris, a man sat in his suite reading the morning newspaper. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored three-piece suit, his posture radiating the quiet confidence of old aristocracy. To the hotel staff, he was Count Victor Lustig. To the police forces of several nations, he was a ghost. And to the history books, he was about to become the man who pulled off the most audacious confidence trick in human history. As Lustig sipped his espresso, a small article in the back pages of the newspaper caught his eye. It was a brief, public complaint about the state of the Eiffel Tower. The monument, built for the 1889 World's Fair, was never meant to be permanent. Now it was rusting, desperately in need of expensive repairs, and the public was divided on whether the city should keep funding its maintenance. Some columnists were even suggesting it should be torn down entirely. Lustig set the paper down. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face. Where the average citizen saw a municipal headache, Victor Lustig saw millions of francs. He was going to sell the Eiffel Tower. The mastermind and the setup. Victor Lustig was not a common thief. He was an artist whose medium was human psychology. Born in Bohemia, he spoke multiple languages fluently, possessed flawless manners, and understood a fundamental truth about human nature. People will believe almost anything if it is wrapped in enough bureaucracy and prestige. Lustig knew he could not just walk up to someone on the street and offer to sell them a national landmark. The scam required meticulous preparation. First came the forgery. Lustig visited a high-end printer. Using a combination of bribes and his irresistible charm, he acquired official government stationery bearing the seal of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, the actual ministry responsible for the tower. Next, he researched the Parisian scrap metal industry. He did not want the largest, most established companies. They would have legal teams that vetted every contract. Instead, he looked for wealthy, ambitious, mid-tier dealers. These were men who had made a fortune but were still desperate for social status and a massive breakthrough to enter the big leagues. He selected 5 targets. Finally, the invitation. Lustig pennied a highly confidential letter to each of the 5 dealers. The letterhead was flawlessly official. It invited them to an exclusive, top-secret meeting at the Hôtel de Crillon to discuss a sensitive government contract. When the dealers received the letters, they were intrigued. The Crillon was where international treaties were signed and billionaires stayed. If the government was hosting a meeting there, it had to be legitimate. The secret meeting. On the day of the meeting, Lustig received the 5 dealers in a private, opulent suite. He introduced himself as the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. Beside him sat a man named Dan Collins, whom Lustig introduced as his private secretary. In reality, Collins was an American con artist and Lustig's trusted partner in crime. Lustig looked around the room, his expression grave, and began his pitch. He told them, "Messieurs, what I am about to tell you must not leave this room. If a single word of this leaks to the press before the ink is dry, it will cause a national scandal, and the government will deny everything." The dealers leaned in, completely captivated. Lustig explained that the city of Paris was facing an unprecedented financial crisis. The upkeep of the Eiffel Tower was costing taxpayers millions of francs that the city simply did not have. Furthermore, he reminded them, the tower was originally intended to be dismantled in 1909 anyway. Lustig whispered to them that the government had made the difficult, agonizing decision to quietly dismantle the Eiffel Tower and sell it for scrap. 7,000 tons of premium iron. Because of the public outcry this would inevitably cause, he explained that the entire operation must be handled in absolute secrecy until the contract was finalized. Lustig played the part of the stressed, reluctant bureaucrat to perfection. He spoke of engineering costs, municipal budgets, and political red tape. He did not try to sell them anything. Instead, he made them feel as though they were being invited into an elite, inner circle of state secrets. Before the meeting ended, Lustig drove them all to the Eiffel Tower in a rented limousine for an inspection. He used his forged credentials to bypass the ticket lines, casually nodding to the guards, who assumed this elegant man in a top hat was indeed a high-ranking official. To the dealers, the sight of Lustig effortlessly walking them past security was the ultimate proof. The trap was set. Finding the perfect mark. Lustig told the dealers they had until the following week to submit their sealed bids for the 7,000 tons of iron. But in truth, Lustig had already chosen his victim during the limousine ride. His target was a man named André Poisson. Poisson was a wealthy scrap metal dealer who suffered from a profound lack of self-confidence. He was new money, desperately craving acceptance by the Parisian business elite. Lustig noticed how Poisson hung on his every word, terrified of making a mistake, yet eager to prove himself. A few days after the bids were submitted, Lustig called Poisson back to the Hotel de Crillon. He informed Poisson that his bid was the frontrunner, but there was a minor complication. When Poisson arrived at the suite, Lustig looked nervous. He sighed, rubbed his temples, and complained about how difficult it was to live on a modest government salary while managing multi-million franc contracts. He dropped subtle hints about the lavish lifestyles of his superiors and how expensive it was to entertain guests in Paris. Poisson, being a businessman, understood immediately. The government official wanted a bribe. This was Lustig's stroke of pure genius. Up until that moment, a small part of Poisson had been suspicious. The deal seemed too good to be true, but the moment Lustig asked for a bribe, all of Poisson's doubts evaporated. In the corrupt world of 1920s French politics, nothing felt more authentic, more genuinely government, than a corrupt official looking for a kickoff under the table. Poisson wrote 2 checks. One was for the official bid to secure the contract for the Eiffel Tower. The second was a massive cash bribe given directly to Lustig to ensure his bid was the one chosen. The total amount was rumored to be around 250,000 francs, a massive fortune at the time. The Great Escape and the Return. The moment Poisson left the hotel suite, Lustig's aristocratic demeanor vanished. He and Dan Collins packed their bags with furious speed. They cashed the checks at a Paris bank, stuffed their suitcases with stacks of francs, and boarded the next train out of the country. They fled to Vienna, Austria, where they checked into a luxury hotel to wait for the fallout. Lustig bought the international newspapers every morning, bracing himself for the front-page headlines detailing the hunt for the man who sold the Eiffel Tower. He expected the French police, Interpol, and private detectives to be hot on his trail. But days turned into weeks, and nothing happened. There was absolutely no mention of the scam in the news. Paris was quiet. Lustig, using his deep understanding of human psychology, realized what had happened. André Poisson, upon realizing he had been utterly humiliated and defrauded of his fortune, was too proud to go to the police. To admit that he had tried to buy the Eiffel Tower and paid a massive bribe to a fake official would have made him the laughingstock of Europe and completely ruined his business reputation. Poisson chose to swallow the massive financial loss and take his shame to the grave. Lustig had committed the perfect crime. Most criminals would take their fortune and retire, but Victor Lustig was addicted to the thrill of the game. 6 months later, his funds running low due to gambling and an extravagant lifestyle, he returned to Paris. He forged a new set of credentials, rented another luxury suite, and gathered a fresh batch of 5 wealthy scrap metal dealers. He gave the exact same pitch, used the exact same stationery, and took them on the exact same limousine tour of the tower. The second scam went just as smoothly, and another dealer handed over a massive check to secure the dismantling rights. However, just as Lustig and Collins were headed for the border with their second fortune, the mark discovered the truth. Unlike the proud André Poisson, this second victim did not care about his reputation. Furious at being swindled, he marched straight to the Paris police and demanded an international manhunt. Lustig and Collins managed to slip across the border just in time, escaping to the United States. Victor Lustig would go on to pull off dozens of other legendary scams in America, even successfully conning the notorious gangster Al Capone. Eventually, the law caught up with him. In 1935, Lustig was arrested in New York and sentenced to Alcatraz, where he died in 1947. Today, the Eiffel Tower stands proud against the Paris skyline, but beneath its iconic iron beams lies the ghost of a story so absurd that it reminds us of the power of ultimate confidence. Victor Lustig did not just sell a tower. He proved that with a tailored suit, a steady gaze, and a flawless understanding of human vanity, you can sell absolutely anything in the world.